From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The Senate votes narrowly with a vice presidential tiebreaker to approve Pete Hegseth as the U.S. Secretary of Defense, while confirmation hearings loom this week for President Trump's next pick, who might face some GOP defections, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley. It was a late Friday night in the Senate, which split 50-50 on Hegseth's nomination to lead the Pentagon until the arrival of Vice President JD Vance, who broke that tie, only the second time in U.S. history that a tie has been broken by the vice president for a cabinet nominee. 3 Republican senators voting no on Hegseth, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski and Maine's Susan Collins, seem to be upset about Hegseth's past statements about women in combat, as well as allegations about his personal behavior. The third no being Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, who was focused more on Hegseth's experience and the size of the job of managing the Pentagon. Here's a piece of the statement by McConnell. Effective management of nearly 3 million military and civilian personnel, an annual budget of nearly $1 trillion, and alliances and partnerships around the world is a daily test with staggering consequences. He went on to say that Mr. Hegseth had not yet demonstrated that he will pass this test. Be that as it may, Hegseth was sworn in on Saturday, and here he is on the job Monday outside of the Pentagon.
There's an emergency at the southern border. That the protection of the sovereign territory of the United States is the job of the Defense Department, and the cartels are foreign terrorist organizations. As a result, this Pentagon Snap 2 last week, we helped move forward troops, put in more barriers, and also to ensure mass deportations, support of mass deportations in support of the president's objective. That is something the Defense Department absolutely will continue to do. And today, there are more executive orders coming that we fully support on removing DEI inside the Pentagon, reinstating troops who were pushed out because of COVID mandates, Iron Dome for America. This is happening quickly.
Kim, what do you make of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the Senate's decision to move forward and confirm him as President Trump's nominee?
Well, as you note, it was a very close-run thing. I would note that when JD Vance came in to cast that tie-breaking vote, that was only the second time ever that you've had a vice president had to come in and break that kind of tie. The last time was also under Donald Trump, when Mike Pence in 2017 cast a tie-breaking vote for Education Secretary nominee Betsy DeVos. I find it interesting. There was not very surprising that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska voted no. They had certainly expressed reservations. People expected them to, especially when it came to Pete Hegseth's personal life, his views on women in the military, but also the allegations of alcoholism, of sexual abuse. I think what happened here, though, is that, for most Republicans, the Kavanaugh hearings, the Brett Kavanaugh wildness, it ended up setting the bar a lot higher before you reach a moment in which they consider these to be credible or disqualifying, as it were. And so most people blew past that. I can tell you that there were a number of senators who really did feel some of the concern that was verbalized in the end by Mitch McConnell. And here's another comment from McConnell. The U.S. faces coordinated aggression from adversaries bent on shattering the order underpinning American security and prosperity. In public comments and testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, Mr. Hegseth did not reckon with this reality. That was a worry that a lot of Republican senators had. But here's what mattered in the end. The Trump team had pushed Hegseth forward, demanded quick action, and by pushing him to the front of the line, really elevated the pressure on Republican senators not to vote against one of the first people. And many of them decided in the end they were comfortable with the idea of a guy who had served in the military himself, had that knowledge. They believed he hopefully will have the respect of the troops, that he will also work well with other people put in the department that might have a little bit more institutional knowledge. And so they decided to vote yes in the end. And we'll see if they then change their vote going forward when it comes to some of Trump's more controversial nominees, Tulsi Gabbard or, for instance, RFK Jr.
Let me second a couple of those points. It also strikes me that the Kavanaugh hearings to confirm now Justice Brett Kavanaugh were a turning point in some of these kinds of debates about the personal conduct of nominees, because some of those allegations that were aired in the press, sometimes by anonymous sources, were pretty wild. And it seems to me that there's a bit of lingering sense by some of these Republican senators, perhaps, that unless there is a hard claim with a date and a name attached to it, something that's been investigated, it is easy to potentially brush that kind of stuff off. The second is, while I share the concerns that Mitch McConnell laid out there, the Pentagon is a giant bureaucracy. And to my mind, the best nominee to disrupt it is somebody who already knows his way around the building, knows where the levers of power are. But now that we have a confirmed nominee, let's hope that Pete Hegseth rises to that occasion. Meantime, Alicia, no rest for weary and cross-pressured Republican senators, because on Wednesday, the Senate is taking up confirmation hearings for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the nation's Secretary of Health and Human Services, or HHS. The Journal today has an editorial under the headline, "Why RFK Jr. is Dangerous for Public Health." Can you give listeners a sense of what the argument there is?
Well, I think there are several reasons why he could be dangerous for public health. And part of it is the slippery manner in which he conducts himself. And I think the editorial likens him to Anthony Fauci in that regard, in that he's completely obfuscated his anti-vaccine views. Now, there are legitimate concerns, let's put aside, with some of the issues with the COVID vaccines and how they were approved for children and the boosters and the transparency and all that. But RFK has a long history of cozying up, and he is a trial lawyer, cozying up to the trial lawyers, and basically exploiting people to enrich himself and his trial lawyer friends. He's done that as well with glyphosate, which is Roundup, the herbicide that a lot of farmers use. And he has a long history of also embracing kind of crackpot theories, whether it be like Wi-Fi radiation can cause cancer and damage to your mitochondria. There really isn't a crackpot theory he hasn't embraced. But just focusing in on the vaccines, he's kind of walked back his prior statements that polio, for instance, the polio vaccine may have actually killed many more people than polio, and that these vaccines are killers. Now he says that he will not take away anyone's quote-unquote vaccine, and that all he cares really about is ensuring vaccine safety, and that people have all the information about the vaccines. But that's, again, fundamentally dishonest, because the problem is, and we can discuss this a little more, Congress set up this program in 1986 when a lot of vaccine makers were exiting the market, especially for children's vaccines, because they were getting swamped by these lawsuits with hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, and they were losing money and they couldn't stay in. And so Congress set up this special national injury compensation program in which people who claim to have been harmed by vaccines could file claims for compensation. And this program has worked relatively well. It has reduced the amount of lawsuits against vaccine makers because the standard of proving your claim in federal court is actually much higher. And many of them can just get just as much compensation from the government if their vaccine is on the quote vaccine table and the injury has been actually linked. There's been definitive proof linking the injury to vaccines. And there are with certain vaccines. There's no doubt that vaccines can cause some rare side effects. But the concern is that it's HHS secretary that RFK could actually remove especially remove vaccines from the program and then open up the manufacturers to a flood of litigation that drives them from the market.